Hi there, and welcome to our next unit in understanding intercultural communication. Now, this week we're going to be talking about a topic that I think has a lot of relevance to our society and indeed global society. We find many places around the world today that are struggling with this idea of what we might call the perceptual context, which is essentially how we begin to see other people. It is obviously, as we've seen over the last few weeks, we have multiple layers to our cultural context. And a person's environment drastically affects the way in which they see other people. Now, think about this for a moment. As you look at this picture, how would you describe what is in this photo to somebody else? Take a moment to just observe the different elements in this picture. What would you start with? What would be the first thing that you might describe to someone? Interestingly enough, when this exact same survey and photo was shown to students in the United States, they started by describing the fish. Maybe you did as well. When this picture was shown to students in Japan, they started by describing the pond first. Why would somebody do this? Why would people observing the exact same thing describe it in different ways? Let's try another test. Which two of these pictures go together? If you had to put them together in a grouping, which two of them would go together? Well, again, when this question was asked to students in the US, they put the cow and the chicken together, because the cow and the chicken are both animals, and so they belong naturally in the same category. To students in China, they put the grass and the cow together. Why? Because there is a relationship between the grass and the cow. In some ways, it demonstrates the individualistic versus collectivistic ways of thinking. It helps us understand how cultural proclivities affect the way that we process information, and even what we choose to see. And this is when we speak about culture and cognition. People from different cultures think about different things, but do higher mental processes such as perception and remembering differ across different cultures. The life experiences of a Guatemalan Ladino are markedly different from those of a person living in the Ukraine. Few people question that the content of thought for people in different cultures varies. How does this happen, and how has it been developed over time? This, of course, leads to some of the things that we deal with in our culture today. There are certainly different cross-cultural differences in sensation and perception. Culture affects our information retrieval. In addition to culture, of course, age and education are two other variables. Age and recall are definitely related. Culture's language and literacy rate may also affect recall. But once information has been stored, it is relatively useless unless it's able to be retrieved. And once that information is stored, it usually stays in the category that it lives in. So one of the barriers that we face in intercultural communication, as we have spoken about a little bit already, is our proneness to ethnocentrism and, of course, the stereotyping, which can lead to prejudice and discrimination, which leads to fear, as we've seen in multiple contexts around the world. People are fearful, perhaps more than ever before, of other people around them, and, of course, of cultural imperialism. Now, let's go back and do another quiz. Now, try and be honest as you think about these pictures. What is your perception of these people as you see them in this picture? How would you describe them? What is the first thing that comes into your mind when you see these people? How about these? And finally, what about these people? No doubt, as you were looking at each of these pictures, instantly a thought came into your mind about what type of people these people are. This is, in a sense of categorization. which is a grouping or sorting of objects, events, or living things into identifiable groups. We might have taken the first picture and categorized them as boys or as skateboarders. The second picture, we might have characterized them as cheerleaders. These are different categories. But stereotypes exist when membership in social categories that are believed to be associated with certain traits and behaviors. So when we begin to say, well, in the second picture, not only are those young women cheerleaders, but they might be unintelligent, or they might exhibit a certain way of behavior. That is when we begin to develop a stereotype. See, stereotypes are categories that often carry a positive or a negative evaluation. Generally, we think of stereotyping as a negative assumption, but it doesn't always have that connotation, and it typically refers to membership in social categories. Stereotyping, we must understand, is also an automatic response, whereas prejudice is a controlled process. Often people in society talk about our importance of, or the importance of diminishing stereotypes. Unfortunately, my opinion is that I think that that is a bit of a moot discussion to have, because we all carry those stereotypes and will continue to do so as long as our brains continue to classify and categorize information in the ways that it does. But the harmful aspects of stereotypes, which is cultivating a prejudicial response to somebody else, is definitely a controlled process that needs to be interrogated. It's what we call a cultivation theory. Long-term exposure to media, for example, cultivates in viewers a perception of reality. For many people today, as they watch things on TV, they assume that the social reality that is being portrayed in the content is actually true, and the more we begin to expose ourselves to certain views, the more that cultivates a perception of reality. When people watch a certain news broadcast or read a certain newspaper that has a particular persuasion, and they only begin to read from that content or that writer, they begin to cultivate a view in society that is definitely just skewed towards one view. Think about this for a moment. You're hosting a party at your house tonight. What types of people will you not invite because of the stereotypes you hold to those groups? Be honest with yourself. Who is not going to crack an invite to your party simply because of a stereotype that you hold against those people? This is where we need to have a discussion about what we call ethnocentrism. Ethnocentricity is also a natural condition. Most people of the world don't like foreigners, to be honest. They sometimes display feelings of hostility and fear towards them. At the core of ethnocentrism is a tendency for a people group to put down another group towards those that are on the outside, because ultimately we think that our in-group, our culture, is superior. Ethnocentrism obviously negatively affects intercultural communication, and therefore it needs to be interrogated. In an increasingly growing, diverse workplace, managers, subordinates of different cultures find themselves interacting with each other. To the extent that these different interactions are ethnocentric, perceptions, communication, will often negatively be influenced. In cases where managers and subordinates are of different cultures, subordinate ethnocentrism may interfere with the interpretation of managerial appraisals even. We need to think about it this way. To a certain extent, a low level of ethnocentrism is exhibited in the idea of patriotism. You think about it for a moment. To be proud of one's country, whatever country that may be, is often measured by how our country performs against another country. We are better than so-and-so, we might say. Now, that may be harmful on certain levels, but it's generally encouraged that people would be patriotic about their country. That's what we might call a very low level of ethnocentrism, which generally doesn't do any harm to the other group. But contrast that with the other side of the continuum. A very, very high level of ethnocentrism can lead to what we saw in World War II and in other places in Africa and around the world of ethnic cleansing. where one group is so convinced that their culture, their ethnicity is superior to another, that they will actually seek to obliterate and destroy another group. Of course, there is a definite relationship of ethnocentrism to racism. They are synonymous. They are not synonymous, rather, but they are related. It's probably true that you're unlikely to be racist and not ethnocentric, but it is equally true that it is possible to be ethnocentric and not racist. There are certainly people and cultures that exist that are very proud of their country and very ignorant of the rest of the world and think that their country is superior, but the people within that country are of multiple different racial and ethnic groups. To be racist and not ethnocentric is pretty unlikely. There's a biological component at the core of racist ideology, and that actually doesn't exist in the concept of ethnocentrism. Racist ideology is a belief in the moral or intellectual superiority of one race over another. It is a belief that this superiority is biologically based, not socially based. And so it's important to distinguish between those two things. Because somebody says my country and my people are better than yours, are not necessarily doing so because they believe they're biologically superior. So it's important for us to interrogate the motives behind why people say the things that they do, because in society today, it is very easy for people, especially in the 140 characters, to say things that may appear as though a person is racist, but may not, in fact, be racist. So it's important for us to interrogate them. It's important for us to have those conversations with one another and to distinguish between what we mean by ethnocentrism, stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, and cultural imperialism. All of those concepts are very important for us to have a good handle on and a good understanding of if we're to communicate effectively with people around us. So continue to think in yourself and in your communities and in your future workplace or even current workplace as to how you can begin to interrogate some of those ideas yourself.